Imagine a world-ending event. No, not just one city falling or a single empire going dark. I mean everything, everywhere, all at once. Today, we're going to investigate the closest the ancient world ever came to a total apocalypse. Just let that sink in for a second. We're talking about a period of maybe 50 years, one person's lifetime. This wasn't some regional problem. This was a near total failure of the entire interconnected world of the Eastern Mediterranean. A thriving, globalized system just wiped off the map. So to really understand what was lost, we first have to get a picture of the world that existed before the fall. And trust me, it was way more sophisticated and connected than you probably imagine. You could honestly call this the first real age of globalization. You had these great empires, the Mycenaeans in Greece, the Hittites in Turkey, the New Kingdom in Egypt, and they were all part of this huge, intricate network. They were sending diplomatic letters back and forth, trading luxury goods, and they all depended on these complex supply chains for the two things that defined their entire age, copper and tin, the ingredients for bronze. And that's the central mystery, isn't it? It's the question that has haunted archaeologists and historians for decades. How could a system that seemed so strong, that had worked for centuries, just completely fall apart with such terrifying speed? To find the answer, we have to become detectives. We have to sift through the ashes of this ancient crime scene. And let me tell you, the evidence written in burned layers and ruins is just overwhelming. Okay, so first, let's go to Greece. The world of Achilles and Agamemnon, it literally burned to the ground. And the coolest piece of evidence comes from the palace of Pylos. Archaeologists found hundreds of clay tablets, the palace's last government records, and they show these frantic orders for coast watchers and demands for bronze to make weapons. And here's the crazy part. The only reason we can read them today is because the fire that destroyed the palace actually baked them hard as rock. A perfect accidental record of a kingdom's last desperate hours. Next up, the Hittites. These guys were one of the era's great superpowers, right up there with Egypt. Their capital city, Hattusa, wasn't just conquered, it was burned and totally abandoned. So completely, in fact, that the entire empire just vanished from history for thousands of years. We've actually found some of the king's final desperate letters, begging other rulers for emergency shipments of grain that, well, clearly never made it. And then there's the city of Ugaritic, this incredibly wealthy port on the coast of Syria. One of the last documents ever found there was a clay tablet sitting in a kiln. It was never fired, never sent. It's this absolutely chilling message from the king, saying his cities have been burned, his troops are scattered, and enemy ships are on the horizon. It is literally the final panicked breath of a civilization about to be snuffed out. Just look at how fast this all happens. This was not a slow, gentle decline. It was a flash flood. Around 1200 BC, the Mycenaean palaces start burning. Just 10 years later, poof, Ugarit is gone. 10 years after that, the entire Hittite Empire is history. By 1150 BC, it's pretty much all over. An entire world order completely gone in 50 years. So what in the world could cause such a massive, coordinated failure? For a long, long time, the answer seemed simple. Everyone pointed the finger at a mysterious group of invaders. Yeah, the traditional villains in this story are called the Sea Peoples. Egyptian records show them as this marauding horde that just swept across the sea and destroyed everything. But the new theory flips that whole idea on its head. What if the Sea Peoples weren't the cause of the collapse? What if they were actually a symptom of it? What if they were refugees, fleeing their own burning cities, victims of the same catastrophe that was bringing down everyone else? And this brings us to the leading modern theory, championed by the historian Eric Klein. It's called systems collapse. The basic idea is that the Bronze Age world's greatest strength, how interconnected it was, actually became its single greatest weakness. The whole thing was like a house of cards, perfectly balanced, but with zero shock absorbers. See, the crucial point here is that it wasn't just one thing. It was everything, all hitting at once. Imagine a massive decades-long drought that causes widespread famine. We have evidence for this. At the same time, you have a series of major earthquakes, an earthquake storm that cripples major cities. The famine leads to hungry people rising up and rebelling against their leaders. And with all the ports broken and people fighting, the trade routes just snap. No more grain and no more tin and copper to make bronze for weapons and tools. Any one of those things might have been survivable, but all of them together? It was a perfect storm that just knocked the whole system over. But there's another piece to this puzzle.
A really fascinating, often overlooked clue. And it's not about what was destroyed. It's about what the survivors chose to do next.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Okay, so the palaces, the trade routes, the empires, those were lost to fire and chaos. But the ability to write, at least in Greece, seems to have been deliberately erased. The writing system they used, called Linear B, wasn't just forgotten, it was abandoned. Why? Well, Linear B was the language of the palace bureaucrats. It was the tool they used to count sheep for taxes and keep records of who owed what. For the regular people who survived the collapse, forgetting how to write might have been an act of liberation from a failed system.
And the consequence was profound. Greece plunged into a 400-year-long dark age. The population crashed, art became super basic, and all that complex knowledge of their ancestors just vanished. It was a total societal reset, a conscious step back from the very complexity that had just failed them so badly.
And this is where a 3,200-year-old story becomes a pretty urgent modern-day warning. Because the things that made their world so vulnerable, they look uncomfortably familiar. I mean, just think about it. We rely on these super efficient, just-in-time global supply chains for everything, from computer chips to medicine. We've systematically stripped away backup plans and redundancy in our systems because it's more profitable, making them incredibly fragile. We're facing huge climate stress on our food supplies in the exact same parts of the world, and we're seeing massive migration pressures driven by instability in a changing climate. The parallels between their fragile, interconnected world and ours are kind of hard to ignore.
Which brings us to the most important lesson of all, and Eric Klein sums it up perfectly here. Complexity doesn't guarantee security. In fact, the more complex and interconnected a system is, the more spectacularly it can fail. Their world didn't end because it was backward. It ended because it was advanced.
So that's the final question, really. The one that stares back at us from these ancient ruins. Was this whole thing just a 1 in a billion perfect storm of bad luck that could never happen again? Or was it a pattern, a structural warning telling us what happens when a globalized world becomes too complex, too efficient, and too interconnected to handle a real crisis? A warning that we, in our own sophisticated world, might still be choosing to ignore.